Okay, we're going to start today with Matot-Masei. I don't want, and maybe we'll end up there as well. There's three different focal points. I would say main focal points. Okay, one is the second source, which is really the place that introduced, which is in Perek Kav Zayin, or where the issue is introduced. That's even better. The other is in this week's Parsha, which is the first source, which is in Perek Lamed Vav. Afterwards, there's also in Sefer Yeshua, in chapter 17, where it actually gets played out more in real time. We're going to start reading it, but I want to ask the following question as we begin. What's their interest in their request? And maybe that just seems like too obvious of a question. But when I say what's their interest, I want to focus it a little bit more. Is it perhaps purely financial? Listen, there's money to be made over here. There's property to be owned. Why should we lose out and lose on the property? Now, it could be that all of you will say to me, I don't like that suggestion. That's fine. But I just want to explore what the various possibilities are. So one I can call financial. The second I can call Zionist. That this is an expression of the Zion. And you do understand how that would be a popular type of way of interpreting it, especially among Zionists. Third, if you want, I can call it it's a feminist issue. And I wonder out loud, if we were to go back and to look 2,000 years ago or so, 1,500 years ago, for that matter, 1,000 years ago, and start looking at all of the interpretations, start looking at all the commentaries, and see how many of them are reading into it more of a Zionist objective and how many are reading them into it a feminist objective, I think I would be fair to say that in today's world, it would be much more, certainly among a certain population, it would be much more popular to call this a feminist section. And on the other hand, you can say to me that the question itself is in a sense not fair. The very fact that they have a voice and the very fact that they have agency, the very fact that they're able to turn and to make a request may actually be feminist in a certain sense, no matter what you say, certainly in terms of a text or a time or a place where women's voice was not necessary, or names were not mentioned and voice was not necessarily heard. So as much as I'm going to ask or try to make this distinction, you could tell me that that distinction is a completely unfair distinction because you need to plug in at least that feminist part of it, however you want to define feminism, which itself, I mean, we're not necessarily going to get involved in feminist theology. We're not going to talk about the first wave or the second wave or the third wave or whatever other waves that you may have of this. But as I said, that's of far less interest to me. There's a fourth possibility, and again, you can read this into any of the other possibilities. You obviously can combine them, and that is this a question of respect for their father? And what I mean by that, respect for their father, is they don't want their father's name to be forgotten, because as soon as if the property, the father dies without sons, and therefore in a certain sense his name is not carried on. Now you can say that itself is a function of a sexist type of perspective, but let's start again with this week's Parsha, and then we'll go backwards a little bit, and then we'll go into some unexpected places. V'ikru roshei avot lemishpachat b'nei Gilad ben Machir ben Menashe mimishpachot b'nei Yosef. So we're halfway through the pasuk, but let's pause there for a moment. First of all, identified very clearly as Yosef. On a midrashic level, we will find various expressions of the tribe of Yosef being people who are Zionist. Again, maybe that's the wrong word to use. Ohavei Eretz Yisrael. There's only one of the sons of Yaakov in the Torah, at least, who makes a request to be buried in the land of Israel, right? And we're told clearly about it. And you could have asked about the others, so you'll find Midrash will say, of course all the others were buried there, but we just don't have any clear description in the text that Yosef has to make this request. And it's not so obvious that all the others, yes, you can pay a tour guide to find you the various graves of the various Shvatim, but I hope you realize that it's not as obvious as some people were to think. Let's continue in that pasuk, because as I said, it goes back to Yosef, but let's look at the exact family that comes. V'ikru roshei ha'avot lemishpachat b'nei Gilad. Now keep that in mind. Keep the Gilad family into all of this. Ben Machir, Ben Menashe, B'mashpachot B'nei Yosef. So this is a Menashe issue, it's a Yosef issue, Machir issue, and finally, from the family of Gilad. V'dibru l'fnei Moshe v'l'fnei HaNesi'im, v'roshei avot l'fnei Yisrael, v'yomru et Adoni tziva Hashem l'tet et ha'aretz b'nachala b'gorel l'fnei Yisrael. That we acknowledge completely that the divisions of the land is all being done based upon God. So therefore, we completely accept God's word. Va'adoni tziva b'Hashem, and you gave the command based upon God. So you notice God is in both halves of the verse, and they're not challenging God's word whatsoever. L'teit nachalat tzlavchad achinu livnotav. And you commanded to give the inheritance of tzlavchad, our brother. And I love the brotherhood in this, because it didn't have to use that word, and there is this sense of brotherhood, and there is going to be a sense of caring over here, and you said to give it to the daughters. V'yulachad mibnei sheftei b'nei Yisrael l'nashim, v'nigra nachalatan b'nachalat avotenu, v'nosaf al nachalat hamateh asher tiyena lahem, u'megaral nachalatenu yigareya. He goes, but there's a potential problem with that is that these girls get married. By the way, the problem right now is the shidduch crisis, because they're not married and they're not all that young. So that's another part of all of this. But they're going to marry somebody. They could marry from any one of the tribes. And when they do that, then the land which is Yosef, Menashe, again, you want to keep going, Machir, Gilad land will end up then being lost and being moved over to a different tribe. By the way, this could happen at any point in any time in history, but nonetheless, they're saying there's a problem. Which itself is interesting and made it all the more complicated, and that's why we're going to ignore that, even though I bolded it. V'yitzav Moshe b'nei Yisrael api Hashem leimor Kain Matei b'nei Yosef Dovrim. Now notice again that Moshe says to the children of Israel, Al Pi Hashem. Again, God is all over this. This is being done with God's absolute approval, and it says correct. And by the way, it's interesting. It's Kain Matei b'nei Yosef Dovrim was similar to before we saw, right? Yes, the Matot-Masei are correct. So now you have a problem of God saying, yes, they're right, and yes, they're right, because there is somewhat of a tension. It's not impossible at all, and it needs to be nuanced a little bit. And therefore, the instruction that Moshe says based upon God is Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem livnot tzlavchad. Again, God all over this. Zeh hadavar asher tziva Hashem livnot tzlavchad lemor l'tov beineim tiyena l'nashim. So I love that. I wonder why we don't put this on wedding invitations. L'tov beineim tiyena l'nashim. That means that they should marry the people they choose. L'tov beineim. They should marry anyone that they want from their choice. L'tov beineim. Which means there's no forced marriages over here, there's no shotgun weddings, right? This is l'tov beineim tiyena l'nashim, but ach l'mishpachat matei avihem tiyena l'nashim, they should only marry within the tribe. Now, before you get yourselves all excited because of the incredible limitation that just now put upon them, I will note that as of this moment, as the last census that we had not that long ago, there were 52,700 men between the age of 20 and 60 in the tribe of Menashe, which was an increase of some 20,000 from the previous census, which means the tribe of Menashe is trending upward. There's lots of them. There's lots of people being born. Again, that's interesting that there's a 20,000 increase over the 40 years in the desert, which means there's lots of young people, right? I hope that we need mathematicians to work this out, but just note that differential, because that then does make a difference. So it says, listen, there's plenty of people to marry. God didn't say this, because you can all be saying to me, only marry within the tribe, so how many people are in the tribe? There's 35 people they can choose from. So no, it's not just a question of 35 people. There is a much larger pool of individuals that one can think about. And by the way, think this way. Okay, we have, some of us ended up marrying people that grew up in the same neighborhood as us. How many real choices were there within the neighborhood that we grew up in? Was there 50,000? Was it 20,000? Or was the number somewhat less, especially when you then subdivide it into all kinds of other things that people have on their shidduch list or resume or requests or dreams or fantasies? That could be a great book. Shidduch fantasies. Okay. So they should marry, whoever they want, but from within the tribe. V'lo tisav nachala l'vnei Yisrael mimateh el mateh, ki ish b'nachalat mateh avotav yidbaku b'nei Yisrael. But, rather it should stay within the tribe. By the way, this is going to be a problem, which is not just a problem for TZELAFCHAD. This is going to be a problem eventually, at some point, in all kinds of places, in all kinds of tribes, and all kinds of families. Essentially, the dream of keeping each land mass of each tribe absolutely, quote-unquote, pure in terms of that tribe is not as simple because of this problem. And is God really saying that for every single point in history that woman who inherited, because she's the only daughter or there's no sons, they can only marry? So again, just think about this for a second, because what really is the long-term solution here, if there is one? And we can just sign it off with Pasuk Yud, Kasher Tziva Hashem Moshe, Kein Azu B'not Tzlavchad. They followed the instructions of God, and if you just want some good news here, even though it's 3 weeks, we can talk about the weddings. V'tiyena machlat Yirtzav V'chaglav V'molkav V'noah B'not Tzlavchad L'vnei Dodeim L'nashim. They married their cousins. Being Mishpachot B'nei Menashe Ben Yosef Hayu L'nashim. What does it mean? Their cousins, people from the tribe of Menashe, some of Yosef. They were married, and therefore the land remained within the tribe of Menashe of Yosef.
I just want to make a comment that confirms what you were saying. Pasuk Vav, they're told Lato ben Etienne Nashim. Lato, the best. So one could interpret that perhaps as saying that there were many good choices, but you get to choose from the best. So you did have selection. It doesn't say Lito ben, it says Lato.
Yafeh.
Looking for the best.
Yafeh ma'od. So they can pick the choicest of the choice, and again, not feel they're settling, not feel that they're limited, and so on. But it's really interesting over here that all this had to be introduced, and God had to get involved, and there was this concern about the losing of the land. So, which again, it takes me back to my original question: what was the concerns of the daughters of TZELAFCHAD, and then now, how closely is that correlated to the concern of the others from the family, others from Menashe, and is there a certain type of a mindset over here that's taking place? So let's just keep that in mind for a second. Now let's work backwards and see to what extent we can try, perhaps, to determine our initial question is what really is the motivation over here. So we look at source number 2, which is back in Perek Zayin. Vatikravna benot Tzlavchad ben Chefer ben Gilad ben Machir ben Menashe l'mishpachat Menashe ben Yosef. So now you see again exactly which family they came from. Ve'elish shmo benotav Machla Noah v'Chagla Melka v'Tirtza v'Tamodin l'fnei Moshe v'l'fnei Elazar Kohen v'nei Nisim v'chol Eda Petach Olmod Lemor. Avinu meit b'midbar v'lo betoch Eda hanod'im al Hashem ba'adat Korach ki b'chet omet. Uvanim lo hayulo. Now, when they say ki bechet omet, that's interesting, and I'm sure many shiurim could be given on that point. Which sin is he? Is he the makoshesh? Is there really any sin over here? Is that just a turn of phrase? So let's leave this and let's not. And they ask, Lama yigra shem avinu mitoch mishpachto ki ein lo ben. So what words do they actually say? Why should our father's name be erased, forgotten, taken out, be limited from the family? Which means what they're saying is that if there's no inheritance, our father is wiped out from the family. So when I asked my question before, is it that they want to pad their bank accounts? They want to make some money? Is it out of a Zionist issue? Is it really a feminist request? Or is this kibbud av? And so far, just reading these words, it very much sounds like kibbud av. And again, I admit what I said before, the fact that they can articulate and they can speak and they have a voice and they have agency is in and of itself something which is interesting as an additional point, but not necessarily as the main point. And they continue and they say, Tana lanu achuzah betoch achei avinu. So also over here, avinu, achei avinu, the brothers, and they refer to it, our brother. So it seems to be that there really is a nice, tight, even loving family relationship over here. And they're saying is that if we don't receive this, then essentially our father is forgotten and is essentially written out of the family. Vayikra Moshe et mishpatan lefnei Hashem, vayomar Hashem El Moshe lemor Kain benot tzlafchad dovrot naton titin lahem achuz anachla betoch achei avihim. Again, it could have said among the tribe, but again, there is this sense of brotherhood, which is over here, vavartit nachalat avihim lahem, and therefore it should be given to them. So I assume you all agree with me that the stated or the more obvious or the more revealed issue here really seems to be this other one of respecting their father and not wanting the father to be forgotten. Okay, let's place all of this aside for a moment, and we're gonna come back to it. It's just going to take us a little bit of time to come back to it. But what we're going to do is to explore another issue that takes place in this parsha or these parshiot, and that is the story of the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Ruvain. And just, again, I don't really want to ruin this and already tell you the end of it, but some may remember, and that is it's not just Bnei Gad, Bnei Ruvain, there's also Chatzi Shevet Menashe. And that becomes interesting because of, first of all, it's interesting just to start off, if we speak about Yosef and Bnei Menashe and being Zionist and so on, so what in the world are they doing on the other side, and how did they get dragged into this, and what's going on over here? And yet there's other problems as well, and one will be very obvious very soon, and what we always try to do is turn the problems into solutions, but let's just start reading. Source 3. Umednei Rav Hayal B'nei Reuven or B'nei Gad atzum ma'od. They had a great deal of flock, which is great. I mean, if you follow up on the war against Midian, and they captured so many things, and now they have all of this money, which means essentially people that are poor are going to have problems, and people that are rich are going to have problems. People that are poor are going to complain. People rich are going to complain. Here's their complaint: we have so much flock. What are we going to do with it? And before I go any further, I just want to state something which is obvious and should have been the suggestion. And once you see this, you can't unsee it. You can forget it by next year. Don't worry about that. And that is that they could have requested actually the land that Menashe ends up getting, and we're going to come back to that, which is along the Jordan River, but on this side of the Jordan River. And then they could have requested to use for their flock the land on the other side for grazing, which means there's no reason in the world that they should have to build houses, build cities, build homes, and have their families and children stay there. If it's a land for grazing, and it's a very big land, which is exactly the point. So you can live in the Jordan Valley, and then you can cross over with your flock every single day and take them and have them graze, or you can graze for days or weeks at a time. However, people, I don't know how many of you are cowboys in the waiting, but there's many, you don't have to live in that place that you're grazing. So over here, this starting point, we have lots and lots of flock. Okay. Which means let's just continue with this request. There is something over here which I'm just going to say, it all depends on what your starting point is. From my starting point, and I think Moshe Rabbeinu's starting point, there's something fundamentally wrong with what their request is. And let's read it now with that in mind, because all that I just now did is I just suggested that there is a very simple another solution, which means we've captured all this land. Let's turn this into grazing land for any tribe that needs to graze in it, and there should be no problem whatsoever. So let's now, right? That solution occurred to you before?
No.
So it was worth coming today, just for that. Even it was worth coming today. Okay, we'll rethink. Okay. So let's get to Bnei Gad, Bnei Reuven. Umiknei Rav Hayal Bnei Reuven Bnei Gad. It states the objective facts. Atzum ma'od, which, by the way, should be thank you very much. Look at how much money I have. I started our other discussion with, is this a financial issue? Is this a Zionist issue? You all realize now that I can actually play almost the same thing over here. Now that, right there I want to pause. Right here I want to pause with Eretz Gilad, because we've already just now saw Gilad a couple of times, and is this just a coincidence, or is there something else going on? Bnei Gad Bnei Ruvain, and the order gets reversed. Before it was Ruvain and Gad, now it's Gad and Ruvain. V'yamul Moshe v'Elazar Kohen v'Elazar Dalimar Atirot v'Divon v'Ezer v'Nimrod v'Cheshbon v'Elav Ushvam v'Navo v'On Haaretz asher hika Hashem. Notice God is in the story. God struck this place. By the way, that actually turns this almost into manifest destiny. Look what God did. How can you turn down God? How can you turn down the gift that God wants to give us? It's a land of great for grazing, and we have a lot of flock. Now I'm going to pause right there. What should be the solution? Can we use this to graze? And what should the answer be? Sure. What's the problem with using this for grazing? Instead, Vayomer imatzanu chen be'einecha, yutana ta'aretz hazot lavadech lachuzah. We want that land. Al ta'avirenu et Yarden. We do not want to cross the Jordan. Now, it's at this point that things are problematic, which means the essential request or observation that we have lots of flock and this is a great place for grazing itself should not have been problematic. And even say, oh, look what God did for us. All of that could have been utilized. And Moshe does not like this. And let's just put this in context. Moshe, who's being told that his punishment is that he can't cross the Jordan and needs to stay on this other side, they are essentially saying, can we please have some of your punishment as well? But they're not phrasing it that way, of course. And I know that there are commentators who try to twist this into somehow a love for Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's just realize that's pretty far-fetched. And Moshe responds, Vayoma Moshe l'vnei Gad v'lei Reuven ha'achechem. I want to go back to that point of brotherhood, because we're not necessarily talking literally our brothers, we're talking about the next tribe, but it's brothers. I mean, just like brothers were mentioned in the previous section, and there was the sense of warmth and caring and so on, over here it's actually the opposite. What happened to your sense of brotherhood? Meaning on the most basic moral level, how can you say this and how can you do this? And he says, ha'achechem yavo l'milchama v'atem teshupo, because they said we don't want to cross over. Your brothers will go to war and you're going to sit over here. V'lama tini'un et leiv b'nei Israel. And this is a second point. Why do you want to cause fear among the Jewish people? Me'avor el aretz asher noten lahem Hashem, in order to move over from the land which God has given them. Which means, if you've noticed so far, Moshe has just now already thrown out three different issues. This is the land that God gave. Do you have any sense of Jewish history? Do you understand anything about Jewish history? Do you understand what the whole story was going down to Egypt was in order to come back and to get this land? On top of that, your insistence of staying away can instill fear. And by the way, there are Rishonim who will discuss in situations of war that if somebody does something to cause fear among those who are fighting, they are over a mitzvot aseh, maybe they're breaking a lot aseh, and so on. That causing fear, especially in a time of war, is something which is horrific. And over here, Moshe is accusing them of a lack of brotherhood, of being part of Am Yisrael. One of the things, if you look at the Rambam, he says that somebody who does not feel the pain of Jews, they don't have a cheluk in Olam Haba. He writes in Hilchos Avil that you don't even shiva for such a person, and any mitzvah they did, God throws away. That you need to feel the pain of Am Yisrael, to be part of Am Yisrael in that sense, because otherwise there is just something lacking. And Moshe just is warming up here. Because then it's about to get worse. Again, you can judge what's worse, because so far he's accused them of not being part of the people, right? And you should be part of the people. Again, your brothers will go to war and you're going to stay here. And he's accusing them of instilling fear, and he's accusing them of not understanding Jewish history, of rejecting the land which God has given. But then, as I said, maybe to get worse, because how much worse can you get? In Parshat he says, Koasu avotechem. That was done, and of course he's referring to the Meraglim. So comparing people to the Meraglim is obviously not going to be a great comparison. I mean, just in terms of the moral statement which is being made. And they also cause the people to be afraid, to not want to go to the place of the land Asher Natan Lahem Hashem, the place which was given by God. So again, you have this double-edged issue, causing fear and therefore a rejection of Jewish history, not understanding what the next chapter is supposed to be, and not understanding what this whole larger story is. And if that wasn't enough, and God got angry with them, and God swore towards them, and going on with the whole punishment. Then none of the people from the age of 20 will go into the land. Again, very clear. Don't you understand what history is, or Jewish destiny is, for that matter? It revolves around this land, and the rejection of the land is something which is morally horrific. And Pasuk Yadalit, if it's not good enough, V'nei kamta tachat avoteichem tarbut anashim chataim. Now you've come to stand in for this terrible generation, these terrible people of a sinful culture, if you will. By the way, I don't know about you, but somebody else at this point probably should have backed down and said, you know what? Maybe we didn't think this through well enough. And as I said, there is another compromise position that you could take where you get to use the land and so on. And instead, they come back and they say, Pasuk Tetvav, V'yasaf od lenich, 1 second. Right? No, they double down. We're going to build places for our animals. We're going to build homes and so on. But we're going to come and fight. So therefore, your first objective, your brothers are going to fight. You're going to stay here. No, we're going to fight with them, and then we're going to go back, and then we'll stay over there. And that is something which, at the end, Moshe accepts. And I'm not reading all of this right now. I just want to move a little bit further here. And let's go to Pasuk Kaf Zayin, Kaf Chet. Notice that God is in their description. Oh no, we're going to fight the war of God. We're with God, and so on and so forth. But of course, you realize, that there's something very wrong about this. They're going to fight the war of God, which is the right thing. But the wrong thing is, then they're going to go home. ויצב להם משה את אלעזר כהן ויהושע בן נון וראשי אבות המטות לבני ישראל ויאמר משה עליהם אם יעברו בני גד ובני ראובן את הירדן כל חלוץ למלחמה לפני Hashem. If they go and they cross over and they fight, again, לפני Hashem is there as a part of it. Again, they finally came to the point of understanding that. So Moshe responds, yes, the war לפני Hashem. ונכבשה הארץ לפניכם ונתתם להם את ארץ הגלעד לאחוזה. Then give them Eretz HaGilad. So we'll just right back now again to the Gilad, which is interesting. And yes, I sat with maps during the week and looking and comparing and trying to figure certain things out. But let's just go a little bit further. And, they accept, both sides accept this becomes the fundamental way of creating vows, and then let's get to the point that it becomes a little bit more interesting because they're given this, they accept it, they say yes. Nach pasuk lamed bet, nachnu navor chalutzim lefnei Hashem al eretz Canaan v'tenu achuzah nachalatenu me'ev liyarden. Again, that is our inheritance on the other side of the Jordan. V'itein lehem Moshe lefnei Gad v'lei Reuven, pasuk lamed gimel, ulachatzi shevet Menashe ben Yosef, which we don't know where that came from. There was no reason, there was no hint that got added in, half of Menashe ben Yosef. Mamlechet Sichon melech ha'emori, ve'et mamlechet Og melech ha'bashan, ha'aretz la'area begvulot arei ha'aretz saviv. V'yivnu b'nei Gad et Divon, ve'et ha'tarot ve'et ha'or, ve'et ha'rot, and so on, all the names of all of these cities. Uvnei Ruvain banu et Cheshbon, ve'et, and so on and so forth. You got all of their cities. And Pasuk Lamed Tet. V'yilchu b'nei Machir ben Menashe. Okay, so now we're back to a specific family in Menashe, b'nei Machir. You can go back now, start comparing. Gilada. So they went to a place called Gilad. Now, of course, you have to realize that the name Gilad is something that we've been paying attention to. And they went to Gilad, V'yil Kedua, and they captured it. V'yorish et Emori asher ba, and they defeated and they inherited from the Emori that were there. V'yitain Moshe et Gilad l'machir ben Menashe v'yeshiv ba. And then Moshe gives the Gilad. Now that's very interesting because earlier on, it's not what we were told. What we were told earlier on, that the Gilad were given to the Bnei Ruvain and the Bnei Gad. So now we're told that actually when everything got played out, Menashe went in, took and fought for. which is interesting because they actually said, "Oh, the fight already took. It's about tashchis not to take the land to this point, right? We already captured it. We don't want to just let it go to waste." On the other hand, Bnei Menashe, and they actually go to war and they capture other land and they're taken. By the way, in terms of, maybe we'll see a Yerushalmi about this, that there may be a nafkamina, at least according to one opinion, there may be a nafkamina regarding the laws of Bikurim on the other side of the Jordan between Menashe and between Reuven and Gad, if you would bring Bikurim from those places or not. By the way, the answer is there's a machloket, but there's a machloket in the Mishnah, and later on there's a machloket in the Gemara there. It continues and it says, Pasuk Mem Aleph, V'Yair ben Menashe halach v'yulkod et chavotehem v'yikratem chavot Yair. Not to be confused with the book, which is called the Chavot Yair, which is not called the Chavot Yair. Rather, the book, the Sefer from Yair Bachrach, if you read its introduction, it's also Yiddish, not like far-fetched, but it's real Yiddish, because he calls his book Chaviz Yoir. Because his grandmother's name was Chava, so he is Chaviz Yoir. So therefore, the Chaviz Yoir is, it's like if somebody says, oh, it's written in the Chavat Yair, it's just really, you can call it that, I'm fine with that. But it's not what he called the Sefer. His Sefer, by the way, if you read the introduction, if you want to go back to feminism, his grandmother apparently was really an exceptional scholar, one of the women who was really well known. If I'm not mistaken, she was a granddaughter of the Maharal, and she was very well versed in all areas of Torah, and he calls his Sefer Chaviz Yoir. So, getting back to this Chavat Yair, we're told that V'Yair Menashe, he captured it, and it was called Chavat Yair. V'Novach halach v'yilkod et kanat v'et bonotel v'yikor lo Novach bishmo, and that we pause there. Rashi, in source 4, says v'yikra eten Chavot Yair lefi shelo hayu lo banim karatem bishmo l'zikaron, because he didn't have any children, then they called the land as a memorial for him. So it's at this point we have to stop, because now we realize that there may be a little bit more of a parallel, or at least a comparison or contrast with the Matot-Masei. Over here there's somebody, again, without children, they were without sons, they were without children, and they decide we're going to name a place, we're going to name a city after him. Which means there are ways of solving problems when we're afraid of somebody being forgotten. So I'm just saying is that this Rashi becomes a little more interesting, but there's actually a lot more intrigue over here, just in order to understand why you would say he doesn't have children. So now we always have to be careful about interpreting evidence, correct? Yes? You have to be more careful about interpreting evidence which is missing, which means when evidence is missing, then you can draw other conclusions as well. So look what happens in source number 5. Here it is, the list of the Bnei Menashe. And by the way, can we all be honest for a moment? These lists are the ones that we skip or we don't pay attention to, or we just read kif, we daven them, right? You don't learn these, you daven them, and you say davening with them, but you don't actually pay attention. You don't pay attention to what's there. What do you certainly not pay attention to? What's not there. So who's missing from this whole list over here? And the answer is Yair ben Menashe. We're just told that he went and he fought. How was he introduced? Yair ben Menashe alach. Now you look at all the list of Bnei Menashe, and what are you going to notice? That lo and behold, there's nobody named Yair ben Menashe. What does the Matot-Masei say in source 6? And this is great. He says, Bnei Menashe, Yair ben Menashe lo chashuv. He's not there. He's not counted. Lefi sherashi pirish lekamun sof matot. Al vikra eton chavot Yair lefi shelo yelobanim karu b'shmo lezikaron ulekach Kahn shechshiv mishpachot lo chashiv Yair upashut. By the way, everything was good till the last word. It's pashut. He goes. By the way, I'll help him a little bit. Maybe the whole list of people over here is only with an eye towards inheritance, and he's never going to inherit because he doesn't have any children. He's going to die without any children, and therefore it's just going to get lost. So therefore, he's not mentioned over here. By the way, I don't know if any of you are satisfied with that, but look what happened. There is a lack of evidence, and the Meshech Chacham is learning pshat from the lack of evidence, saying, "Oh, that actually proves the point of Rashi over here that this Yair died without children." Are we good? And therefore, this was our solution, the memorial which was created.
He didn't have children, he didn't have sons.
That's very good, but it sounds like he didn't have children. But let's continue. On the other hand, if you look at source number 7, the Ibn Ezra is going to shake everything up, and that is, he writes, Va'ir ben Menashe hu mi mishpachat Yehuda. Yair ben Menashe is not from Menashe, which of course is a little bit problematic, because then why is Yair ben Menashe called Yair ben Menashe if he's not from Menashe? Now, where does he get off saying this? Well, by the way, just notice something. You also now realize that his not being mentioned in the earlier place from the children of Menashe would have a really good reason. Why? Because he's not from Menashe. So look how you can look at the lack of evidence. You can do this in different ways. One is that he was there and he's from the family, but the other is he's from the family, but he's a cousin. By the way, notice cousins are also interesting in all of this, because that's really where we started today, with some girls who were encouraged to marry their cousins. Again, first cousin, second. By the way, cousins are great. Cousins are like brothers or sisters that you can only have the good part of it. You don't have to have all the fighting with, unless you really practice. Then you can. Growing up, my father's an only child, so I have no first cousins from my father's side, and not all that many on my mother's side either. So it's like, for us, certainly on my father's side, second cousins were like family. So over here, what we have. Again, Ibn Ezra is interesting. I hope that some of you are wondering, well, that's really a nice thing to say, but how do you know this? Where does that come from? So let's continue in the Ibn Ezra. Kikain Katuv, because it says so. So let's just pause a second, stop the Ibn Ezra, and look in Divrei Hayamim. This is another book we tend never to look at. The Kalev ben Chitzron Olidat Azuva Ishavet, and I'm going to skip a little bit. This is all in the Yehuda family. The Talmud Azuva Kaklo Kalev et Efrat v'Tilot Tchor. There's whole discussions on how to understand this pasuk. V'Chor Olidat Uri v'Uridat Betzalel. Do you recognize any of these names? All of them from Yehuda. V'Achar bar Chitzron El Bat Machir Avi Gilad. And then he married somebody who was a Bat Machir. If you marry a Bat Machir, the father of Gilad, do we recognize any of those names right now? Yes, we recognize those names, because we've seen all of them before. So when the Ibn Ezra tells you that this Yair, well, what's interesting is that he's called Yair ben Menashe. So is he a ben Menashe? Well, it depends how you define the word ben. If you're going to say a descendant of Menashe, he is a descendant of Menashe. What's the more important point of all this, if you're looking at the bigger story? The family of Menashe, they go to war and they capture some area, including this fellow named Yair, who, if you look in Divrei Hayamim, what do you now come to this realization? That he is from the tribe of Yehuda. So now, do you like the Ibn Ezra's point a little bit more? And would you be going back and saying to the Meshech Chachma, why are you doing this? Why are you bringing proof for a Rashi that may actually not be shot? Rashi didn't. Come on. Why are you using this as your proof that he actually comes from Menashe and bringing a proof for something which is not really the case? So we're going to write. Rashi doesn't touch that point. Look what Rashi writes. It's the Meshech Chachma that did it to you. What does Rashi write? Lefish lo yolbanim kartam b'shmo l'zikaron. He didn't make it's the Meshech Chachma that did this to you. Let's go to the Ramban in source number 9. Ha'ish hazeh yityaches el mishpachat imo bavor shelakach achuzato imahem. That, I don't want to say he takes his mother's name, but that's really what he does. Why? Because he lives with Menashe. So he's their cousin. And they all go up to this place, and he joins them over there, and he goes together, and therefore he lives with his cousins, and he lives in Menashe. Now, some of you can say, hold it, what happened to this issue about living with your tribe, and the whole concern about the tribes, and holding on to their land, which means, I'm going to do this again now. The concern that the family of Menashe had about the daughters of TZELAFCHAD are going to go marry somebody else, and we're going to lose the land. But it looks like it just now happened, the exact same thing over here, where a daughter of Menashe marries someone from Yehuda, and someone from Yehuda comes up over here. Now, again, is it that now they're going to lose this land to Yehuda, or he's going to live together with Menashe? I'm just pointing out that all of this is at least ironic, and I hope interesting, because there is this parallel which is over here taking place. And the Ramban a little bit further down tells us V'tam v'yitain Moshe et hagilad l'machir ben Menashe l'mishpachto. It doesn't mean to a tribe; it means to a family. And once it's the family includes people who married other tribes. So, by the way, this is not a simple Ramban. But on the other hand, what's the problem? Yair ben Menashe is the problem. So it was given to the family of Menashe, even though it's not strictly speaking tribal. He writes at the very end, these people were warriors, and therefore and because they're warriors, they went and they captured it, and therefore they had this capability. The Chizkuni adds a little bit more. He says in the early parts, like the Ramban, Nikral Shemo Imo Afal Piken Shehu Hayam Mishpacha Yehuda Ein Pitchon Pele Baldin Lachlok Eich Lakach Yair Nachala Im Shevet Acher. Don't start with me, he says, and start complaining or asking, how is it that someone from Yehuda takes inheritance together with tribes, with the tribe of Menashe? Shrei Eretz Canaan hi hanachleket l'shvatim, v'lo Eretz ha'amori hi Eretz Sichon va'og shehi me'ever liyardin mizracha. He says this whole issue of dividing property on one side of the Jordan and on the other side of the Jordan are not the same, are not equal, which means it would be a question if this happened on this side, on the Eretz Canaan or the Eretz Yisrael part of it, but on the other side, everything goes, and therefore it's not a question. And then he adds, "V'yikratem chavat Yair lefi sheneharag b'milchemet Ai nichtav kan she'asa kach lefnei kivush haaretz v'karan al shemo lehiskir aleim shem b'gvurato." So now you just added another part with, unfortunately, we can identify a little bit more today, and he was killed in war, and therefore it was very important for them to put some kind of memorial that he will not be forgotten, because this was a soldier who was killed. And again, just reading that today at least changes everything, because it obviously gives much more power. He does note that he's killed by Milchemet Ai, and again you can ask, well, how do you know that? And essentially that's based on the Gemara in source number 11, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, which following the sin of Achan, right? Achan sins, he takes from the spoils, which also is just an interesting parallel to our whole story. Begins after the spoils of war in Midian, but now he was not supposed to take from the spoils. He takes from the spoils, and what happens is that we end up having trouble in the next battle, the Battle of Ai, and it says, look where it's bolded later on in the Gemara in source 11, V'yakumihem anshe ha'ai kishloshim v'shisha ish. The Gemara is going to wonder why it says kish, around or like 36. It's going to say later on, last line, "Lo ne'amar ela kishloshim v'shisha ish elazeh Yair ben Menashe sheshakul keneged ruba shel Sanhedrin," which is an interesting way of using the number 36. It's most of the Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin is 70, 36 is most. I wonder how much that could be connected to Lamed Vav Tzadikim and so on. But he says that over here is that only one person was killed there, and that was Yair ben Menashe. That means this is the Yair, this is the Battle of Ai, and that's exactly what the Chizkuni just now did for us, and essentially saying that this person was killed on the other side. The Malbim in 12 follows what I think we already could have understood from the Ramban and the Chizkuni, and he says, "Ba'asher haya ba'ever ad Yarden lo kpidu shetarev nachlat ben Yehuda ben nachlat Menashe." Nobody cared so much about what happened on the other side, because it's just different kind of rules and different kinds of approaches. The Yerushalmi in 13 raises the question regarding the Bikurim on the other side, and whether Chatzi Shevet Menashe has a different status because they captured it, and maybe that's different from having it been given to them by Moshe. If you're interested in the halacha, you'll learn the Yerushalmi and the commentaries. Now, I just want to move over the time that we have left. I actually have two more things, but I knew that I was not going to get to both, so I'm going to at least mention now one of them. There was something that I kept pointing out, and I really didn't come back. I really didn't explain it. It wasn't just that they went and captured this land called the Gilad. They actually named one of their kids Gilad. So there was this Gilad issue over here, which we have to then ask ourselves, what's going on? So in order to do that, we need to go back and to say, well, where did we first see the Gilad? Where, meaning, what's the origin story of all of this? And it takes us back to source 14, and that is when Yaakov Avinu was running away from Lavan, which realized that there's a parallel that we need to pay attention to. The one who stressed this, as far as I know, the most, I'm just going to jump to this in source 16, is the Gra. It is not in a obvious or famous place. It's the Gra's commentary to the Tikkun Zohar Chadash. I once had a whole shir on this. If you want, we could do it again. V'ha'inyan ki Yaakov b'Lavan dugma Yisrael b'Mitzrayim. He says if you pay attention to the narrative of Yaakov running away from Lavan, he runs away and he goes for 3 days, and then after 3 days, then Paro, Lavan hear about it, and they catch up. They catch up on the 7th day, and on and on and on. Kamashavad Simon Labanum Galut Yaakov. Right, they were struck with Kol Rechusho, and he took Kol Rechusho, and at the end he writes, right. Okay, I didn't give the whole quote. A little bit further on, he goes, if you pay attention, everything over here is similar to leaving Egypt to Yaakov going to Eretz Yisrael, which means the Gilad episode over here, as far as the Vilna Gaon is concerned, of course there's going to be a Gilad episode because there is a template. And this is, in a certain extent, going to follow the template, even though there will certainly be differences. But essentially, that's why we're in source 14, because we find the Gilad. Vayivrachu v'kol shelo v'yakam v'yavar et nahar v'yasam et panav har hagilad. V'yugad Lavan v'yom hashlishi ki barach Yaakov, exact same pasuk regarding Paro. V'yikach et achav imo v'yirdof acharav derech shivat yamim. Same kind of verse with Paro. V'yidebek oto b'har hagilad. So now you see Har Gilad is the location. V'yavo Elokim Lavan harami b'chalom halayla, and God comes to Lavan harami in a dream at night. And v'yom Elo yishamer lecha pentaber Yaakov mitovra. Right? Be careful. Be careful. And he chases him. He catches up to him by Gilad. Accuses him. Why did you steal the trafim? And why didn't you let me kiss my children goodbye? And so on, and the children of my children, and so on and so forth. Yaakov, unfortunately, says in Pasuk Lamed Bet, Im asher timtza et Elokecha lo yeh neged achenu. Im asher timtza et Elohecha lo yichya neged achenu. That if your idolatry is found, but whoever person has it, they shouldn't live. Some connect that with the death of Rachel. By the way, Menashe may be very interested in the death of Rachel. Just saying that as a point of possible interest. He goes and searches all kinds of places. Rachel had them, and they're hidden, and so on. At the very end, they make a pact, right? And then you'll notice something else. V'ikach Yaakov Evin v'yomer matseva. I mean, all kinds of times you find Yaakov and a matzeva. He makes a matzeva. Yaakov, two avanim gather. It's also interesting, Yaakov, when he leaves Eretz Yisrael, there's this gathering of stones and so on, and the use of stones, and that itself should be compared. They make a gal of stones. What is a gal of stones? It's some kind of like a small kind of a wall, which would be made by piling stones one on top of another. V'yachlu sham al hagal. V'yikra lo Lavan yigar sahaduta. It is the stones of testimony. That would be Aramaic. V'yikra Yaakov lo Gal-ed. And Yaakov calls it the exact same word, Gal-ed, right? But it's interesting because you have the Gal-ed over here by the Gilad, and this is where. So one has to wonder a little bit about the sequence, about when it got named. Is it called the Gilad because of the Gal-ed? But I just want to note what's said. Vayomer Lavan Hagal hazeh eid beini ubeinecha hayom al ken karashmo Gal-ed, and we'll skip a little bit. Right? Don't do anything negative to my children, and so on. Eid Hagal hazeh ve'eid hamatzeva. Im ani lo e'avor elecha et hagal hazeh ve'im ata lo ta'avor elai et hagal hazeh v'et hamatzeva hazot l'ra'a. Elokei Avraham, Elokei Nachor, Yishbotu Beineinu, Elokei Avichem, V'yishba Yaakov b'pachad aviv Yitzchak. Now, what just now happened by the Gilad? Something happened, and that is a border was created. And what's the significance of this border? That Lavan's going to stay on one side, to the north, and Yaakov is going to stay on the other side, which means it's at this moment, one could argue at least, it's at this moment that Am Yisrael, on some level, is created. Why am I saying that? Because a nation is connected to land. They just now created the boundary of the border of their land, and that's the significance of this gal. Lavan says, I'm going to stay on this side. And if you go back to the whole thing, Lavan hears that they left, and he goes chasing, and God comes at night in a dream and says, you better not do anything, and you better not say anything, and so on. And he goes chasing afterwards, and he's looking for his idolatry, right? But he's limited to what he can do, and they create a pact, they draw a border, and that's the Gilad. So what's interesting about this is that the family of Yosef feels this need to go back to this Gilad. So as I said, there's something that needs to be added to all of this. When Bilam comes, and that's in source... Well, let's go back to 15 first. God only appears at night to the nations of the world, which makes this direct comparison between the two. Next point. In source 17, so if you remember, when Bilam is on the way, he gets pushed into this gader, this fence. Rashi writes, what is this gader? Stam gader shel avanimhu. That it is actually something which was built out of stones. The Targum Yonatan in source 19, which is translated back into Hebrew, will tell us something remarkable, but we really don't need the Targum because we have the Medrash Tanchum in source 20. Vatochatz regel Bilam el Hakir, Hagal hu Hakir, lefi sha'avar Bilam et hashvuah shenishba liYaakov, shenemar im lo tavor tagala zev tamatziva hazot lira'ah, uBilam ze Lavan, shenemar rami ovid avi. Now, what exactly does this mean that Bilam is Lavan? The way it's normally stated, if you want to be mystical, say he's a reincarnation. Others will say he's a grandson. It's family of Lavan. He comes from the same place as Lavan, but what did he do? He broke the vow. How did he break the vow? Because God said not to do anything, and they set a boundary. And he had to stay north, and instead he comes traveling because he wants to curse. And God said to Lavan, shh, be quiet. Which means now where we're up to in Bamidbar, following the story of Bilam, the whole story which goes back to the original creation of this boundary of the Gilad becomes something much more interesting. But I just want to finish this up by saying the following couple of thoughts. One, we can't ignore this, and it was easy to ignore it because it almost seemed natural. The fact that we have someone from Yehuda living together with somebody from Yosef should really be much more interesting than you let me get away with the first time I said it. Which means if you're going to talk about Am Yisrael coming together, then you have to fix the problems which existed before, and a Sefer Bereshit perspective on this. But look what we just now did. This is the beginning of Am Yisrael as a nation. Why do I saying that? Because they just now separated from the place they used to live. When they were growing up, they always could have said, who are we? Well, we live, Lavan's our grandfather, and we live over here. This is our citizenship, and we have the right to vote, and we care about the elections, and this is who we are. Or you can say that, no, I have another grandfather, and he comes from a different place, and we're going back there. But not only going back there, we're making a boundary. And the creation of that boundary is the Gilad, which means that even though it's not Eretz Canaan, it is someplace really interesting and historically important. It's historically important because that becomes the beginning of a border which is going to create a people, which means this is ours as opposed to that is yours, which means the border and the boundary are interesting. And by the way, all this you can now go back, and anytime you discuss the Golan Heights, you can be thinking about this particular area. And what's going to happen is the children of Yosef decide, again, they named their kid Gilad, they feel connected to this particular place, and they go and they capture this place, and they think that this is part of the story of the creation of Am Yisrael. And now I'm going back to this point of brotherhood, and their cousin from Yehuda comes and says, I'm with you, and I'm going to fight with you, because this is where we became one people together, as opposed to the love and family, as opposed to everybody else, we are one people. Which is interesting again, that this is Menashe. These are the same people that on one side of the Jordan are saying, well, we have to be able to hold on to our land. One of the daughters may marry out, and on the other, quote unquote, a different tribe. And on the other side, they welcome their cousin in, and not only that, they named the place after their cousin, because he unfortunately is killed at some point along the way. Again, one can argue exactly at which point he's killed. It's described to the Battle of the Eye, but one could argue that he was killed in the actual capturing of the area over there. So again, it becomes a little bit more interesting. But my larger point over here was to keep in mind the various stories that we just now read. Because we read the story about Shevet Reuven and Gad. There were other options over there, which means the relationship between one side of the Jordan and the other side of the Jordan is interesting. You can own the land without having to live on that land. It could be property. Again, am I interested in wealth? Am I interested in Zionism? Am I interested? Again, what exactly is the interest over here? But now we find something else. But I want to stress this. Apparently, the daughters of TZELAFCHAD, they could have gone on either side. Just think for a second. If they went to the other side, they could have married anybody they wanted to marry, just like we see that Yair ends up over there, and then the whole problem is solved. So now, after everything else that I said, apparently we have evidence that the daughters of TZELAFCHAD were Zionists, because they chose, no, we want to stay on this side. We want to be on this side, and therefore, you're going to be on this side, they did marry somebody Menashe. That's okay. Because they easily could have said, but hold it a second. What about Yair? Didn't he marry? And what about, married? I mean, they have cousins who married other people and moved to the other side. They could have done that, but they chose not to do this. So as I said from the very beginning, how can I actually prove what was the motivation of Bnot TZELAFCHAD? By unpacking the whole story of Yair ben Menashe, we now realize that Bnot TZELAFCHAD, who decided to stay on that side, decided to marry people from Menashe. That was not the only solution. Again, what we did today is just try to work out what the other possible solutions were. And now you learn, you can say that they're feminists, you can say that they're Zionists, and you can certainly say that they were interested in keeping their father's name alive.